Wow, this in and out is getting me a bit. What did you start to say about your father in Marseille?
After the war, during the war he was here in Israel.
Yeah.
And he studied in Beirut.
Yeah.
Pharmacy.
Wow.
Yeah, because they hadn't opened the pharmacy school here in
Hebrew.
Yeah, in the Hebrew. So after the war he went to Marseille and he helped in the camp there. All the refugees were coming, they were putting them, the British had the camp and they were holding them until they were deciding where to
put them or where to send them. Or yeah.
So at the beginning he worked with the doctor, and then afterwards when they realised he spoke so many languages.
Is this your father?
Yeah.
Why did he speak so many languages?
Because he was born in Israel.
Yeah.
But his first language was Yiddish, because that's what they spoke at home. And then they went to live in France, so he spoke French. And then he was studying in Beirut, so he knew a bit of Arabic.
Wow. Good Lord.
Yeah.
Who was this? So
My
how was he
father.
with the Polish army then?
He wasn't, my father's never.
Oh no, it
Polish
wasn't your
army.
father
Not
came
my
with the
father.
Polish army. Sorry. Someone else.
Okay. So and
My father was with the Arabs in Gaza during the war.
in where?
In Gaza,
Oh my God.
the Australian army were there, so he was working there and.
Really?
Wow. Somebody who else said that one of their parents was involved? Yeah. We're talking, Esther. We're talking about the Tnuat HaBricha, the movement, the organizations that moved Jews during the war and during World War II and immediately after World War II from Europe to Eretz Israel. Rose was talking about the DP camps in Marseille and her father's involvement, and Tanya, you wanted to say something.
My father was with the American Army, and he was a quartermaster, and he used to, let's put it this way, liberate some of the used supplies that he was expected to recycle and funnel them through the Bricha, and he also would transport Jewish refugee children when he found them, and befriend them and smuggle them through to Paris and then to Marseille.
Wow.
Well, and the ships went out from Marseille. Esther.
My father was actually born in Poland, but before his bar mitzvah, the family moved to Paris, and he got all his education there. When the Nazis came, his father decided that he would stay in Paris and carry on running his business. He was a furrier. And my father was enlisted with the Polish army because he had Polish citizenship. Hadn't actually got French, as what I understand, because I haven't seen any documents saying he had French citizenship. And he came to England. Now, the rest of his family, his mother, his sisters...
And he came to England with the exiled Polish army.
That's right. Now, well, this...
Because the Polish army fought, and then when they were defeated by the Germans, they went to France to carry on fighting.
Okay, and then
when the Nazis came, they left France to join the Allies in England.
Okay.
And they basically fought with the British army.
That's it. So
it was called the
what has this got to do with moving people? The rest of his family went into hiding in unoccupied France, and he had no idea where they were located or what even happened to his father for some time. He didn't know. Now, on his way to Cherbourg, where that was actually the last boat leaving for Britain, he saw many Jews that he recognised running, looking for somewhere to hide. He said, come to the port at Saint-Port-de-Luc and I'll give you a pass and get you on this ship. He was an officer only because he had a degree from the École Rabbinique, which was the
They went to school there.
That's right. And so did...
They must have known each other. What year was your father born?
Oh, I don't know, 17, 19, 17,
My father was 1921.
21, yeah.
They must have been at school together.
Oh.
It's so
Anyway,
funny.
because he spoke languages, then he had this degree. One of the major high officers in the army knew him because he had been a business partner of my grandfather, a non-Jew, and made him an officer, and he had a little Magen David on his thing, and his shafkid was to deal with Jewish soldiers.
It was like a chaplain.
He was the army chaplain, This saved his life many times because the Poles were still violently anti-Semitic. Any Jewish soldier in that unit got lynched. But he had privileges like he got kosher food for him and the Jewish soldiers and time to daven. He then saw all the, he managed to get these, I thought it was like maybe half a dozen Jews. He didn't really tell us this story. My dad never talked about the war at all. But at his shiva, apparently it was 180 Jews that he managed to smuggle onto that ship.
Wow.
Some still kept in contact. I never knew that that's who they were because they lived in our community in London. But I didn't know the story then, so I had no connection to it. The colonel was Colonel Anders, and he didn't like Jews. And one day, when they were boarding, he saw what my father was doing, and he took out his pistol like that with his hand, and he grabbed my father by the collar, and my father thought he was going to shoot him through the head, and he just kicked him in the back and said, "Get on the ship, you dirty Jew." I hear Hashem really watched over him. He wherever he went, he managed to keep Yahadut 100%.
That's amazing.
And he managed to do what he did. But yeah, so I think it has something
Anders'
to do.
army at the end of the war ended up in Eretz Israel. And Begin, who was released from Siberia, joined that army and came with them, and that's how he ended up here
Oh.
at the end of the war. And he was in place to replace Jabotinsky, who'd been in exile anyway, and died of a heart attack in America midway through
Right.
World War II.
No,
Okay, I want to put it's amazing to have these stories, and now I want to put them a little bit into context. Yes, sorry.
One tiny other story, my husband's grandfather came during the war because he was in Hungary. So before Hungary was captured, he and his brother got to Palestine and fought with the Palmach.
Uh-huh.
His brother stayed and was one of the founding doctors of Laniado, and for some reason he ended up in America and married my husband's grandmother. And then they made Aliya after they retired. And he passed away.
Who was
My husband's grandfather.
no, the uncle who started Laniado?
His name was Latzi Tzik. I don't know his first name for real. That's what they called him, was Latzi. He died very young, but he was one of the founding doctors of Laniado.
No, because I started at Laniado. We were the first.
He was known as Latzi. He was Hungarian, and he came here they have a picture of my husband's grandfather with his rifle, Palmach soldier. Pretty wild.
So one of the Tnuat HaBricha shows you when we look at it, and we're going to look at these two. Did you take anybody who doesn't have sheets? Just grab 2 sheets. There's 2 sheets, and they're in order. And you want to have the 2 tables in front of you.
Thank you.
It really shows you how deeply connected the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael was with European Jewry, and it also shows you many of the tensions. So, do you know how the date of Yom HaShoah was fixed?
The Warsaw
What?
The Warsaw Ghetto.
So, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, do you know when it started?
Erev
Pesach.
And that's the end of the Warsaw Ghetto.
And the end of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising lasted longer than the Polish army's resistance in Poland, which was a few months. And the Ghetto Uprising also lasted a number of months, but longer. So it's not the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and it's not the end of the Warsaw
It's
Ghetto
the
Uprising.
first day after Pesach that
It's
you
the
can have a
first day
holiday.
after Pesach that you can have, that people can get together
Are you for real?
practically
Yeah,
and
sure.
do some kind of memorial. That's why it's on this day. So on the one hand, everybody says Yom HaShoah is connected with the Warsaw Ghetto and on the uprising, and on the other hand, it's not really. It's basically the end of Pesach, and the uprising began at the beginning of Pesach, and it just happens to work out that the day that we that was chosen for Yom HaShoah and for therefore works out 7 days before
Yom HaZikaron.
Yom HaZikaron.
Wasn't
So
it a
Yom,
couple?
it's like the whole Jewish nation is sitting Shiva for 7 days, and then on the last day of Shiva is Yom HaZikaron, and then you get up and you have Yom HaAtzmaut.
I've never
And
heard
it's
of
just fuchs. I mean, fuchs. It's not fuchs, okay? It's not. I
What's
don't
the
believe
word?
it's a coincidence.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why it had to be this day, and it just, you know, that was when they could get organised the first time, which wasn't in. It wasn't even in 1948. I think it was in 1950 because while Milchemet HaAtzmaut was going on, people were too busy to try and hold a memorial.
Wasn't there a resistance? Because
Yeah,
it's
it was
Nissan
also
still?
controversial. It's not very simple.
I mean,
right?
it's still Nissan.
Why is it
Yes, so there was
It's
that's
very
why there were
controversial.
two Yemei Shoah, right? There's Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, which is
Asar b'Tevet?
Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura is today, which is Kafchet
okay.
Nisan, and that was celebrated by all of the secular
The
survivors, particularly from the kibbutz movement, from the Hechalutz movement, which was the survivors from the Hechalutz movement, which was very, very strong in Europe, and which was an integral part of Tnuat HaBricha, and the religious survivors who didn't want to have a
Said
day of
in
mourning
Nisan.
in Nisan, and therefore and wanted to join it on with the traditional day of mourning, and therefore put it on Asara B'Tevet, as opposed to, you know, Tisha B'Av actually would have been.
And when's Holocaust Day in the world? What are they doing?
I think it's in January.
Is that why did they choose
Yeah, I don't
that?
know. Maybe it's it's not the outbreak
Liberation of
war.
Auschwitz or something like
I don't
that.
know.
No.
No,
No.
they're the Russians anyway.
Your phone. You'll tell us in 5 minutes.
By the way, I asked my husband's aunt. He was on the Scaria.
Oh, you
He and
serious?
his brother. Yeah.
Okay. Wait,
I saw the
Scaria
names of the
was
ships,
an
so I
Etzel
asked
ship.
That's fine.
Okay.
Shit.
So, in the Warsaw Ghetto, if we're talking for a minute about the Warsaw Ghetto, the resistance was divided into two plans. There were two headquarters. One was the headquarters of the Etzel, of the revisionists, the movement headed by Jabotinsky, and the other was the Hechalutz headquarters, which was connected with Hashomer Hatzair, which was more secular, and which was part of the labor Zionist movement. So even in the Warsaw Ghetto, in the most desperate of circumstances, Jews couldn't get their act together and work on a united front. There were two plans, two headquarters, two lots of people going out and attacking the Germans and telling people what to do. They couldn't work together. And part of there's a book by Moshe Ahrens, whose name escapes me right now, about the revisionist resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto, which is barely there in Israeli consciousness.
Can you explain what the word revisionist means?
Okay, so they were Jabotinsky called his movement revisionist Zionists because he started it when Weizmann became head of the Zionist organization, which is what we now call the World Zionist Organization or the Sochnut. And he called it revisionist Zionism because he said he was going back to Herzl Zionism, so that's why he called it revisionist, because it's like going back to the original. Because Zionism, he said, had lost its way. Nobody was trying to get a state anymore. Because after the British Mandate, the basic question was, is this good enough? We've got a civilized power looking after the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. Do we really need a state? And Weizmann and the mainstream World Zionist organization didn't want to annoy the British, and they basically said, this is okay. So we've got will work towards more and more rights for Jews, and will work towards having a Jewish majority in Eretz Israel, but everybody knew that that wasn't going to happen because the British government was not allowing it after a number of a very few years, less than a decade, in which there was enormous Jewish emigration under the British mandate. The Arabs began resistance, revolt, political activity, and there was a sense of disruption, and that everything was getting out of control, and the British began to slap on the white papers and clamp down on Jewish emigration. So there were certificates, a very limited number of certificates every year, and the bikush, the number of people applying for those very few certificates, which were given out via Zionist organizations. So, for example, the kibbutz movement had X number of certificates they could give out, and all the parties in the Zionist organization each had a number of certificates, and the kibbutzim had more than everybody else. What was I saying?
What does revisionist mean? The question is, what is
It's like reformation of the Catholic
revisionist?
Church, but revisions of the Jewish.
Why was
What the Lord-
Jabotinsky called a revisionist?
So the bikush was enormous, and the number of certificates was very small, and that's basically how Tnuat HaBricha began. It was there was tremendous anti-Semitism in Europe. Hitler, from 1932 onwards, is in control of Germany. 1938 is the Anschluss, is the declaration of the unification of Austria and Germany, which means there are more Jews who are under German threat. And then in the summer of 1939, Germany invades Poland, and that puts basically all of European Jewry at risk. So from 1932 until the end of the war, there's the Jews all over Europe desperate to get to Eretz Israel, or anywhere. But Europe is seen as, it doesn't matter where you go in Europe, nowhere is safe. And
no one wanted it.
And nobody wanted that. And that's that's why Tnuat HaBricha began. The movement to find ships, bring Jewish refugees onto the ships, and sail with those ships to Eretz Israel, and offload them when the British, somehow or other, when the British weren't looking, and they're all, every ship has its own story, literally every ship has its own story. And you can imagine that it's not so dissimilar to what we see today with the people desperate to get out of Syria,
Iran.
Turkey, Iraq, and flooding onto boats to cross the Mediterranean in the opposite direction to get to Europe. And the boats, what do we see nowadays? The boats are not seaworthy. People are desperate, so they'll get onto anything. There's an enormous amount of money to be made by ferrying these people. And the European countries, which are their destination, don't particularly want to take them in. So,
although they've gotten a much better welcome than the Jews did in 1940s.
Yeah, partly because Europe has an enormous guilt conscience, and partly because of woke politics, and partly because of the recollection of what happened to the Jews in World War II. Okay, so that's the reason, that's the background for the beginning of Tnuat HaBricha. Now, in the same way as in the Warsaw Ghetto, you had revisionist Zionists who were the followers of Jabotinsky, who took a more active, politically, attitude towards the British mandate, as opposed to the mainstream Zionists and the Labour Zionists and the kibbutz movement, who in Eretz Israel were, their fighting arm was the Haganah and the Palmach, whereas the resistance of the revisionists was what we call the Irgun or the Etzel in the main. And in the same way as they fought separately, which is tragic, incredibly tragic in the Warsaw
They also
Ghetto.
fought against each other.
Yes.
Not in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Right.
But again, why is the legacy of the Warsaw Ghetto imprinted with the by the survivors of the Chalutz movement? Because nobody from the revisionists survived. The most intense fighting was around the revisionist headquarters, which flew at some point they raised a Degel Yisrael, but and nobody there survived. Whereas from the Chalutz headquarters, there was at a certain point they decided that some people should leave, and they smuggled them out through the sewers. That's a famous story, and they were the people who wrote the record of the resistance of the Warsaw Ghetto.
So Mordechai and Alevitz was part of the...
Mordechai and Alevitz was part of that, and they got out. They continued partisan resistance afterwards, and they wrote the record of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Whereas the only record of the revisionist resistance was in the archives, the Ringelblum archives, and that. You don't know about the Ringelblum archives? Emanuel Ringelblum was a historian and I think he was also a librarian in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they organized something which was called the Oneg Shabbat Archive, and the idea was that everybody any records that they have of anything going on in the ghetto, from cultural activities to medical records, hospital admittances, should all be gathered together and stored and preserved and hidden, so that there would be a record of what the Germans, of the atrocities of just the concept of the ghetto, of so many people in such cramped conditions with poor sanitation and absolutely not survivable amounts of food supplied. It's just that is a record of annihilation. But also they wanted there to be a record of basically the resistance, the way that the Jews carried on their lives, to the length of lectures and concerts and shiurim and Jewish life and tefillot and within the ghetto.
There was an initiative of recording during the Warsaw Ghetto itself?
Yes, there were meetings every week. It was very, very organized. There were meetings every week. People had to hand in the and people were in charge of collecting, and it was all placed in milk, these metal milk containers, and hidden in different places in the ghetto. And after the war, some of them were found, and not all of them were found. And it took years until they were found.
Were Irina Sandler's children also in that archive, or only she kept the records?
Only
Irina Sandler, who smuggled the children out of the Warsaw Ghetto, and she kept records of them. Did they also record
I don't know.
that?
I don't know. But one would think that would be part of that. Okay, so that's the Warsaw Ghetto part of the. I just wanted to see that this divide between the Etzel and the Labour Zionist movement exists in the Warsaw Ghetto, as well as in Tnuat HaBricha. And you can see in this list, and it's very, very interesting to compare the two lists. The two lists are a list of ships dispatched by the Etzel, and as opposed to a list of ships dispatched by a Mossad le'Aliya Bet, which was part of the Haganah. Okay, so it's again revisionist Zionists as opposed to Labour Zionists. They don't work together.
And one works more than the other.
And what is interesting is that you can see that the Etzel, there's a lot of very interesting things you can see from here. You can see that the Etzel brought in more than 3 times as many olim as the Haganah. Although, if you ask people about Aliya Bet, right, who do they associate it with? The Haganah.
Because they wrote the history.
Because they're the establishment, they wrote the history. But the concept began with the revisionist Zionists. You'll see the first ship, right, sent out by the revisionists, by the Etzel, is in January 1934, whereas the first ship sent by the Haganah is in July 1934. And in fact, it looks like the Haganah started in 1934, but in fact, they didn't really begin until 1938, because the first 2 ships, the first 2 voyages on the Velus were organized by Chalutz people in Europe, and they got the people together and hired the ship and made all the arrangements and sent the ship out from Greece. And the Haganah in Eretz Yisrael didn't really want, the leaders of the Yishuv didn't want it to be sent. And there were big arguments about it. And in the end, b'derech lo derech, it came anyway. Like they couldn't, there was enough disagreement that it wasn't stopped. It came anyway, and it arrived in July 1934. And sailed again in September, but the real the Haganah actually got behind the idea of Aliya Bet only in 1938, which is already after Hitler's been, in Germany for a long time. It's after the Anschluss, after the unification with Austria, so everybody can see that Hitler is trying to expand around Europe, and remember that there's a fascist atmosphere all over Europe, because Italy is run by Mussolini and France is run by Spain is run by Franco, and there's everywhere is fascist.
What happens between 1934 and 1937 that the ships don't run?
Why is there less activity from the Etzel?
Well, there's no ships on either side between 1934 and 1937.
You're right. There's a gap. First of all, you can see that the first ship is called, that the Etzel sends out, is called Kochav, right? So this is it's a ship that they hire. It's like at the beginning of an idea. It's only got 50 people on it.
And it leaves from Egypt. How did they even get to Egypt?
They brought people in different ships. First of all, it's not very many people. Mm-hmm. So people travel in different ways to get to Egypt, and then they actually hire the ship from in Alexandria, and it's again it's a very small distance, and that's that's the first one. If you look up on the internet, what was the first Aliya Bet ship? It will give you the Velus. It won't give you the Kochav. You have to know what you're looking for. And then there's it's something which is it's almost an experiment. It's sporadic. It could be that it's too difficult between 1934 and I think between 1934 and 1937 there isn't that sense of desperation. There's it's a very risky thing to do.
Right, but isn't that the start of the Nuremberg laws, and the Jews are being persecuted throughout Europe?
In Germany, only in Germany, and there's a sense that it's persecution, not more than persecution.
Which they knew for thousands of years.
Yeah. So also.
Maybe the British were very.
Also, if you look
strict.
at what I look at look at a second at the Patria, and I think that will explain a little bit about why there isn't the same sense of threat. Okay, let's just stick for a second with the two charts, and then we'll look at the Patria, and I think that will explain things a little bit more. What else did we want to see? So you've got this gap between 1934 and 1937, which I can't really explain for you, but I think it's basically because there isn't the same sense that Jews are doomed yet. Really.
My ancestors had that sense in the 1800s.
Yeah, okay.
Thank God.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There are people who see the writing on the wall. Jabotinsky is touring Europe in 1939, saying to everybody, Europe is about to go up in flames. Get out, get out, get out.
And no one pays attention.
But not many people listen to it.
Yeah, there were 15.
Some people like that. So before World War II, there's about 30,000 there's about 15,000 who get on the boats, and during the war, there's about another 15,000. And then after the war, it becomes a flood. But it's a very problematic flood. Again, we'll see that in another few minutes. So
What
again,
does it
if we
mean
look at
there's
the...
no numbers?
What?
What does it mean if there's no numbers?
It means that the ship didn't necessarily didn't arrive, and so nobody got off it.
Oh.
So for example, if you look at the I also want to look at this, so we can see that the numbers are gradually growing on the Etzel ships until they get to crazy numbers of, you have 1,000 people, more than 1,000 people on a ship. And for example, the Jeppo and the Katina is a crazy story. The Katina, you see the Katina actually left. The Jeppo was founded. Basically, it was one of these ships that really shouldn't have been sailing. It had 710 people aboard, and it was attempting to basically run the British blockade, and kept having to turn around and go back into the sea. And it joined in April. It joined up with the Katina. No, that's when the Katina arrived. In March, it was traveling together with another boat, which left much later, months later, and it was supplying. It had less people on it. They had about the same number of people, and it had the medical supplies and more food and more equipment than the second boat. So they were like helping each other, and they were traveling together. And then the Jeppo ran aground on a shoal or a rock and sank. Before it sank, all the 700 refugees who were on board were transferred to the Katina. Mm-hmm. So that's why the Katina had 1,400 refugees on it. It started off with 700 and something, but and then with those 1,400, it came to the shores of Eretz Israel, and it was apprehended by the British. And then the question was, do these people, who've been at sea for months and months and months and months, do we let them off? Do we send them back to somewhere? Do we transfer them to? The British had all kinds of different solutions. Some better, some worse. Some more, some which saved Jews, despite not allowing them into Eretz Israel, and some of which condemned Jews. Like the story of the Struma, which in mid-war, why does it stop in 1942, and there's no more ships until after the war? These are only the figures for during World War II, because of what happened to the Struma. It was just too big a tragedy to carry on trying. What happened to the Struma? The Struma was a ship with over 1,000 crammed with over 1,000 refugees, which left from a port in Romania. And again, you look at these the port cities, the ports from which the ships left. They're all countries which were in conflict, which were not conquered by Germany, but they were fighting against Germany. There's basically chaos going on in these countries. That's why they're good places, in inverted commas, to bring refugees to and leave from, because there isn't any rule of law. There's no strong government. There's no everything is in chaos. So Greece is like that, because Greece is fighting against the Nazis, and there are some places which are free, and sometimes some places free up, and the borders are changing all the time. Romania is like that.
Romania doesn't get eventually conquered by the Nazis, right? I thought.
Romania, I think, is at some point decides to cooperate. I have to check. I don't remember. Transnistria is Romania, right?
My
Right.
husband's extended family was butchered in Romania.
Right.
during
The
the war.
Jews of Romania don't do very well. from what I remember.
No. But it's not the
Then
same.
which
It's not the same
It's Poland.
as Poland.
Yes, Moldova.
But Jews are butchered in Romania from the 19th century onwards.
Got it. So what happened to the Struma?
So the Struma is packed with over 1,000 refugees, and it travels from Romania, and it's almost immediately. It's not exactly a fast boat. There are stories of how there are boats which are accompanied by the British, and they think that they can. I think they think they can speed up and get away from the British just as they're when it's dark, and it's crazy. They're barely afloat, and it's so it's followed by the British, and it tries to land people on the beaches. And again, what happens is every time an Aliya boat comes, people come out from Tel Aviv or Nahariya or wherever, or Haifa, come out to the beaches, so that when people come off the boats and are brought by dinghy to the shore, they straight away become part of a big crowd, and it's very hard for anybody to work out who's the refugee and who's just on the beach in Haifa in the middle of the night for absolutely no good reason. Yeah, but you can't arrest them for that. So the whole population is taking part in this, in these crazy stories.
How would they even know the ship is about to come onto land?
Because each ship is organized either by the Etzel or by the Haganah,
and they have communication.
They have.
I mean, this is
They signal. They signal.
Yeah, but they have radios, telegraphs.
No, they don't tell. That's what do you? How did the story of Neely work? Neely is a story that we'll tell later on in the next few weeks. It's all by Morse code signaling and lights from boats in the middle of the night.
The Titanic said that in 1909.
So the Struma was tried to land people, didn't succeed, was turned away, sent back towards Turkey. It had engine malfunction, and very soon after it was sent back from the shores of Eretz Israel in the direction of Turkey, it was targeted by a Russian submarine, and the boat went, and the boat was hit by what did submarines fire? A torpedo. The boat was torpedoed, and it sank with over 1,000 people on it. Ma? Okay, תודה רבה. Okay.
By the way, International Holocaust Day is January 27th, and it's the day Auschwitz was liberated by the Red Army.
So that didn't start a concept.
So it
from
started
from
an
the
enormous.
British that they
First of all,
shouldn't let the boats in?
no, both. It started an international uproar. The boats, stop for a bit. Then after that, the Etzel doesn't send anymore because it's just been too tragic. But there's also much increased pressure on the British to let more people in, and it goes on until the end of
there are no more boats?
Because if you have a certificate, you don't need to come in on an illegal Aliya boat.
I see. So
You
then
can
they
get on a
started
regular
giving
boat.
certificates out. Got it.
But it's not as if the British are letting in lots more people. It's just that the Etzel are not prepared to take the risk anymore because the seas are too dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
With Russian submarines all over Russian and German submarines all over the Mediterranean, when you've lost one boat to a torpedo, you don't send out another boat.
Right. So how did the Skaria have 2,300 people on it? That's a lot of people on one boat.
Yeah,
Was it a very large boat?
it must have been a very large boat. There are some very large boats involved here. That is the climax, the Skaria.
Now I have to go back and read the book my husband's in. She wrote a book about.
Okay, we're going to stop for a second for the siren. Why does my watch?
Yeah, you have 9
my
more
watch
minutes
says
till the
10 too.
siren.
Like that?
יכול להיות שיש בכוונה התלגעתי בפלאפון ולא כי חשבתי שהוא יותר מדויק, אומרים שהוא לא.
Okay, so let's look for a second at the. So we've looked at the Etzel boats. Notice that the Etzel boats, that you can see some of the idealism around it. With the first boat is called the Kochav, Ki Darach Kochav Miyakov, and we're starting a new concept. And then you have four boats which are called Af Alpi. Right? The Etzel call their Aliya, they call the whole movement, the whole Bricha movement, Aliyat Af Alpi. Despite of everything, despite the fact that it's dangerous, despite the fact that it's illegal, despite the fact that the British are preventing us from doing this, we are going to bring Jews to Eretz Yisrael af alpi. It's a Jabotinsky.
Just to confirm.
Hamzah, right? And then you can see that the ships are just sail under their regular names because it's either it's too complicated to change the name or it's not important enough to change the name. The main thing is just to get people out of Europe. We saw that the numbers go up. I didn't include, this is not a full list. You can see there's a gap between there are 15 more ships in 1939 that I didn't even list.
I see you wrote some plus Poland. How did they get ships out of Poland? It's before
because
September?
there was one ship that went out from maybe it was from Gdansk. I don't remember what. Again, whatever could happen, whatever could work. And then if you look at the Mossad boats, so we talked about the Velos. They all have, the Italian or American names of the boats that they managed to get hold of. And the numbers are generally smaller, and it goes only until now. Why does it stop in 1939? Because from 1939, the Haganah and the Palmach say the British are fighting the Germans, so we're cooperating with the British. We're fighting the Germans together with the British, and so they won't do anything illegal from 1939 onwards. Right, so the last boat that they send arrives, which means it leaves them like a month before September 1939, because that's when Hitler invaded Poland.
Do they then petition the British to bring in legal immigrants?
Yes, there's pressure on the British all the time. And there are certificates, and they go mostly to the Haganah. Like they certainly revisionist organisations who are fighting the British are not getting any certificate. So those are the main differences between the Etzel, which goes on trying to bring boats until the situation in the Mediterranean is too dangerous, and the Struma teaches them that Efshar. Af al pi, but Efshar. And they resume, but both sides resume after 1945, after the end of the war. And then we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so, we've got 5 minutes to talk about the Patria, and the Patria is a crazy, crazy story. The Patria does not appear on either of these lists. Do you notice that?
Yes.
Okay, so what was the Patria? Absolutely crazy, and also explains to us this gap between 1934 and 1939. Okay. The final solution becomes Nazi policy only in 1941. Before that, Germany is not clear that they're going to conquer the whole world, and the main thrust is to get Jews out of out of Germany, and then out of Germany and Austria, and there are a number, apart from throwing out every Jew who has Polish citizenship from Germany and sending them back to Poland, which is what happened to very, very large numbers. There is the idea of sending Jews to Eretz Israel is not, is actually fits in with the Nazi policy of getting rid of Jews. So there are actually a number of German Nazi offices whose job is to funnel Jewish funds and Jewish and Jews out of Germany in the direction of Eretz Israel. Why are they happy to do it? Because one organization allows Jews in Germany to sell their possessions, and the money is used to buy for Jewish organizations in Eretz Israel to buy German exports. So it's a win-win situation.
I'm sorry, what?
Jews can essentially send send funds, their own money, to Eretz Israel, which means they can save their property. They can transfer it into cash and send it to Eretz Israel. But it's not exactly you're sending the money to Eretz, because then when they arrive, if they arrive, then they've got money there. And they've got some, they're not starting from nothing, they're not starting from scratch. It's a way of moving property out of Germany to a place where Jews can live. That's one of the reasons behind the enormous German Jewish, the fifth wave of Aliya, right? The Zionist history counts waves of Aliya. It's one of the reasons that there was such a big German Aliya, Yekish Aliya exactly in the 1930s, because this procedure existed, whereas Jews couldn't do that for their property if they were trying to get to anywhere that was if it was America, or you couldn't just move funds out of your bank account in Germany to a bank in England.
So why was it a win-win? Because then they were doing
because instead of actually just moving the cash had to be used by industrialists or farmers in Eretz Israel. In other words, like for example, the kibbutz movement needed lots of farm equipment, so they bought farm equipment from Germany. That added to the amount. That was good for the German treasury, and then it meant that whoever it was in Eretz Israel who'd bought the equipment now owed money not to the German government but to the Jew whose money was used for the purchase.
Interesting.
So you arrived.
Germany was encouraging this?
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
it's not,
Absolutely.
but the money's going to, but they're buying from Germany.
They're buying
Right.
German
Germany.
things.
But they have to pay, they're not paying Germany, they're paying the Jews.
No.
No.
They're paying Germany.
But
Like
why
basically, the Jews' money is transferred to the German government
Okay,
to pay for this equipment.
So
okay.
it
And
never
then
gets to
whoever
Israel.
it was in Eretz Israel who got the equipment issues a bond saying, I owe money to,
Ex-Jew
Reuven
who may
Cohen.
never get.
Uh-huh,
right? And when Reuven Cohen, if he's lucky, turns
I
up
get
in
it.
Eretz Israel,
okay.
then he goes to them with the bond and says,
Okay, so
"Hey,
most of the money's
That's
already
actually
paid.
genius.
That's
go
it.
both.
No, but
But
how,
all of these things, these schemes are go both.
but how does a person in Israel manage to pay him back?
Because they wouldn't be,
They need to buy the equipment.
99%
presumably
of
they've been
time that
making
person
money with
probably
the
never
farming,
said
and it's not as
Well,
if
so-
Eretz Israel is there's a tremendous, not enormous, but very substantial growth and development in Eretz Israel under the British mandate. It goes from being a nothing and a nowhere to being most of Arab immigration, the Arab population, they go crazy about how many Jews came, and that this puts the Arab population up in arms and risk. But the number of Arabs who came from other places, like Syria, like Jordan, like further north of Iraq as well, to live in Eretz Israel because it now has European facilities, right? It's enormous. There's a tremendous amount of Arab immigration as well as Jewish immigration.
And the British don't have a problem with that. They only don't like Jews.
First of all, it's much less documented because the Jews are coming from Europe. They have to have passports. They have to cross a sea. It's not so simple. Whereas Arabs are just like crossing the border,
Nomads.
walking across,
Right.
walking. How do you keep track of that?
They must be back.
Sorry.
Germans ever get paid for the Jews that were saved?
Yes. 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 Yes.
A lot of
Right.
money.
So,
Like, how did that work?
okay. Well, that's part of this story of the Patria story. Okay.
So, excuse me, you're saying that the money never left really Germany. It just stayed
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
It paid for the equipment, and so whoever bought it, the farmers, the industrials, had to pay the person who supplied the cash. In other words, someone brought in Germany, you brought your cash to whatever office, and it stayed there in Germany,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
people
it was a bank
bought on
transfer.
that.
It was a
on-
bank transfer to the German government,
Bank
but that
transfer.
created a debt for you in Eretz Israel, which
Israel.
would be paid off when you arrived.
If you arrive.
If you arrive, otherwise the kibbutz or whatever.
But presumably, like these are people with deep pockets, and they get certificates much more easily than other people.
Can I add to that story? About during the Corona months, my brother in London got a letter from the Israeli Ministry of Justice that some relative from my maternal grandmother had Israeli bonds. He didn't live here. He was in America by then. Escaped Poland, went to an Israeli bond, which is something similar to what you're saying, belonged to neches of other people. And he never claimed them, and he died intestate. He had gone to America, promised to help his wife and child in Poland to join, but he wasn't a nice man. I call this blood money. And he divorced her, and then because she asked him to send money to get her and the child out of Poland, and he refused and divorced her. He never remarried, and he died in America. Of course, they were taken to Auschwitz, and that was the end of them. There was no relatives. The Ministry of Justice was looking for descendants of this fellow. They got as far as my grandmother, who was his niece, and they weren't aware of my mother and her siblings' existence in Britain. But somehow someone put them in touch, and my brother got this letter now, and we had to fill out, well, I haven't finished it, to get the money from these German bonds, which was owed to us since then. Right, there you
That's
go.
wild.
Now, I said I refused to have anything to do with it, and I told my brother, yes, you get that money, and immediately we give it to not just an organisation, I don't want it to buy someone's car, directly to Holocaust survivors still living here in Israel. This is my goal. But if he doesn't move himself, I won't find anyone. That's what I'm worried about.
That's not funny.
No, it isn't. But, I really keep pushing him and pushing him. Dr. Busy, but he has to do, he has to. This is the thing, that there are millions of these claims still going around from what's
That's because they had to be lucky to get here.
Right.
They weren't honest, they were yucky. They kept good files. And
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to
So how did
another crazy German initiative. The Zentralstelle für jüdische Auswanderung, the Central Office for Jewish Emigration, or also known as the ZJA, which was under the supervision of Adolf Eichmann.
Yeah.
And it organized Jewish immigration from Nazi-controlled parts of Europe. In 1940, they chartered 3 ships, the SS Pacific, the SS Milos, and the SS Atlantic. So presumably 2 of them are British or American ships.
Is this
and
why
one-
they had in place all the ability to run away to South America? Because he was already dealing with this?
I don't know.
Probably
That's a red herring. Let's stick to
Okay.
this story. To take Jewish refugees from the Romanian port of Talsia to Palestine. And their passengers consisted of about 3,600 refugees from the Jewish communities of Vienna, Danzig, and Prague. Okay, that means these are wealthy Jewish communities from areas. Vienna is part of the Anschluss. Danzig is the first part of Poland that the Germans conquer. It's a very big port, which has it was contested between Germany and Poland for a really long time. Like the Germans called it Gdansk and the Polish called it. Sorry, the Germans called it Danzig and the Poles call it Gdansk, and it's been like Danzig, Gdansk for a long time, 100 years.
Czechoslovakia already conquered by Germany. In
Yeah. And so Germany is not at this stage. There aren't concentration camps yet. Certainly not concentration camps for Jews. There's no final solution yet. And Eichmann thinks it's fine to get rid of Jews by sending them to Eretz Israel. What's the great thing about it? Germany and England are already at war. So they're making problems for the British mandate. It's a great idea as far as he's concerned. He's sending thousands of Jews in the direction of Eretz Israel. If they get there, then it's going to create more tensions between Jews and Arabs. There'll be more problems for the British to deal with. They'll be more focused there and less focused on Europe. And this is let's just make more trouble for the British in Mandate Palestine. So they leave from Romania, and one second, and they get to. They get to the shores of Eretz Israel, and of course it's 3 ships together. The Germans don't really care if the British find them or don't find them. They don't care what happens to these Jews. So the 3 ships are escorted essentially by British destroyers as they approach the shores of Eretz Israel, and then they're brought into Haifa. And the British say they're going to deport all of them. And the Jewish communities all over, in America and in Britain, are trying to get some, certainly make sure that they're not turned around and sent back to Germany or Poland. And the compromise is the British say, okay, we're going to send them to Mauritius, which is off the coast of Africa and a British part of the British Empire.
Why is it better for them?
So one of the British are sending at this stage. There's detention camps. The detention camps on Cyprus are later. When the trickle of a few thousand is already tens of thousands, and there isn't a good, they need fast solutions. So Cyprus is nearby. At this stage, the British decision is, let's get these people so far away to some hole in Africa that they can't get out of, and they're not going to come, and they won't have any way of getting back into oil. Because from Cyprus after the war, there are ships going out every night from the detention camps in Cyprus, trying to get people into Eretz Israel. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. So these two ships, I think it's the Milos and the Pacific, are in Haifa, and the British transfer all the thousands of people on them to another ship called the Patria, which is an enormous ocean liner, and they're going to send them all on this ship to Mauritius. And a third ship, the SS Atlantic, arrives. The Patria is actually a French ship which runs the line from Marseille to Syria, Alexandria, and Eretz Israel, and it's in Eretz Israel when the Germans conquer France. So the British say, okay, this is a French ship, now it belongs to Germany, so we're going to seize it. And that's how they have the ship. And they load all the refugees onto this ship. And a third ship, the Atlantic, is a third ship that Goebbels has sent, that Eichmann has sent out. And that arrives too, and they begin to load the refugees from the Atlantic onto the Patria as well. And the Haganah, both the Etzel and the Haganah are trying to disable the ship so that it won't be able to leave to go to Mauritius. So the British will have no choice but to leave the people in Eretz Israel. There's an Etzel attempt which fails. Then the Haganah try, and they put a small bomb on board, and it fails to go off. And the idea is to disable the engine of the Patria.
And
So
they're,
they
I'm
won't be
sorry,
able to
they're
go.
right now, where are they?
They're in Haifa.
Off the coast of Haifa.
And so on the 24th, I think it's the 24th of November, they tried on the 24th of November, it's 1940, they try and put a bigger bomb, and they put it next to the inner hull of the ship, and it's a bigger bomb than the original bomb was a 2 kilo bomb. This is like double the size, and it blows a hole in the hull of the ship, and the ship sinks before anybody can be taken off.
Well, no,
Um,
didn't say how much
and-
of the people were taken off.
So some people are taken, off as it sinks, but 267 people are declared missing. 200 of them at least are Jews, and 50 are crew, and some are British soldiers, and nearly another 200 are injured, and eventually 209 bodies are recovered out of those 270, and they're buried in Haifa. And again, this is another example of a tragedy which puts the seal on the concept of using ships during the war. Like the Haganah is like in terrible trouble, both internationally and among Jews and within the Yishuv. Everybody's, who gave that order, whose idea was it, who's responsible. Nobody wants to, the story of exactly who was responsible and how it happened didn't come out until the Haganah operative wrote a book in the 1970s.
Does the British government ever get taken to task for not allowing in the Jewish
They did get
community?
taken to task, yes.
They did?
Okay. Just very briefly, in the 2 minutes that I haven't got left, when does Aliya really come into its own? After 1945 until 1948, when the Haganah and the Etzel are both trying desperately to bring in people, as opposed to the 30,000 who come on ships before and during World War II. There are 70,000 Ma'apilim in 66 voyages, including the really, really famous story, including the Exodus is in 1947, and many, many, many more. There are very few major disasters, as opposed to the stories of World War II. Only 2 ships sank. only 8 Ma'apilim drowned. Yeah,
Was one of them the
relatively,
Altalena?
it's relatively small, but compared with the disasters of
that was
Aliya Bet beforehand, it's like not so many. And on the other hand, the British are not fighting a war anymore, so they are very prepared, and hardly any of the ships actually managed to land people in Eretz Israel. So only 12 out of 66 voyages, 12 actually managed to drop people off. Only 2,000 people, managed to stay in Eretz Israel, and the rest, over 66,000 people, are caught and detained by the British, and most of them are sent to Cyprus. There are some in Atlit, there are some in Germany, which is the story of the Exodus. And basically, and then they take from those people who are detained in Cyprus every month. They take 1,500 certificates and let 1,500 people out. So that's where the British certificates are going, not to any of the Holocaust survivors who are still in Europe, because they're using them all for.
Aren't the people in Cyprus also Holocaust survivors?
Yes, they are also Holocaust survivors, but it just means that all the allocation is going there, and essentially Aliya Bet has taken over the allocation of certificates.
What is the polyam?
But it also makes the fact that there are they don't care that the British are stopping all the ships, because it's happening in the public eye. And this enormous movement of people, with every ship, newspaper headlines all over the world, and the X thousands of Jews turned away from the shores of Eretz Israel and sent to another detention camp under the British in Cyprus. It increases the pressure on the British mandate, until in 1947 there's the United Nations. It's part of the pressure which creates the momentum behind the United Nations vote in 1947. So,
was one of the two that sunk the Altalena?
So the Altalena
Or is that in a
is
different category?
no, it's not in a different category. The Altalena is an Etzel ship. It's carrying not only refugees, it's also carrying ammunition for the Etzel. And this is part of the struggle between the Haganah and the Etzel. Who's going to have who? This is already when it's clear that there's going to be a state. Ben Gurion is in charge of the proto-government, and he's determined to try and bring the Etzel and the Haganah together and make one army. And the last thing he wants is for the Etzel to have its own an enormous supply of arms. The Yishuv is about to be is under attack all the time, and desperate for bullets, for guns, for all the things which are on the Altalena. And Ben Gurion is happier to make sure the Altalena doesn't land them. Basically, he says he's holding a smoking gun to Begin's head and saying, if you want the Yishuv to have these weapons, you have to agree that they'll be handed over to the Haganah, to the army, as opposed to controlled by the Etzel. And there's an enormous political struggle going on, and that's the basic background to the story of the Altalena. But there are also over 1,000 refugees on that boat who have to be rescued when it's sunk.
Horrible.
The whole story is it's as bad as the Warsaw Ghetto Jews not managing to fight
worse.
Together against the Germans in the Warsaw Ghetto.
It's worse, because here the Jews
It's
are
worse.
fighting against each other.
Yeah.
We can't get it together, it's just awful.
It's true.
Mashiach has to come in spite of it, because we're not gonna get it together. I don't believe that.
We
The
have to
fact
figure
that
out
there's
how to get
actually
together
a state, that a state is actually declared, that level of getting it together, and the Etzel Begin eventually cooperates after the Altalena. he cooperated with Ben-Gurion.
Yeah, but Ben-Gurion wouldn't even recognize him in the Knesset. He wouldn't even say his name. He'd say that, whatever.
But he becomes prime
There was
minister.
no.
What's happening today?
History isn't all
I'm
bad.
saying that we can put it together.
As an elected Democratic prime minister.
Again, look at them trying to do that. They're trying to bring down the government.